Why does it feel safer to lose everyone than to risk being hurt again? Like cutting people off brings peace, but also a silence that feels heavier than loneliness. There's a hidden psychology behind this, and by the end, you'll understand why some people disappear, even when they still care. It doesn't happen all at once. No one wakes up one morning and decides, "Today, I'll cut everyone off." It's quieter than that, slower, almost invisible, even to the person doing it. It begins with something small, a message left unanswered, not because they don't care, but because they don't have the energy to respond the way they think they should. And then another, and another, until conversations start to feel like weight, not connection. You see, for some people, being around others doesn't feel comforting anymore. It feels like performance, like every interaction requires something from them, a version of themselves they're too tired to keep pretending to be. So they start pulling back. Not dramatically, not in a way that anyone would immediately notice. They just become a little quieter. They stop sharing things they used to share. They laugh less. They listen more than they speak. And eventually, they disappear from the emotional space long before they disappear physically. It's not always because people hurt them directly. Sometimes, it's because they learned slowly that being understood is rare, that even when you explain how you feel, it gets simplified, misunderstood, or quietly dismissed, so they stop explaining. And when you stop explaining, you start disconnecting, because connection requires being seen. And if someone feels unseen long enough, they don't fight harder to be noticed. They just stop showing up. There's a kind of exhaustion that comes from trying to be understood, a quiet fatigue. And once that fatigue settles in, silence starts to feel easier than effort. Not better, just easier. So they begin choosing distance. They stop replying right away. They delay calls. They tell themselves they'll reach out later. But later becomes never. Not because they don't think about people. They do. More than anyone realizes. They remember conversations, moments, little details others have already forgotten. But thinking about someone and having the energy to engage with them are two very different things. And over time, they start to associate relationships with pressure. Pressure to respond, pressure to be okay, pressure to maintain something they don't feel stable enough to hold. So they step back. At first, it feels like relief. No expectations, no misunderstandings, no need to explain why they feel the way they do. Just quiet. And for a while, that quiet feels peaceful, like finally putting something heavy down. But there's another layer to it. Something less obvious. Because the same silence that protects them also isolates them. And they know that. Deep down, they know. But going back feels harder than staying away. Because reconnecting means explaining. Explaining why they disappeared. Explaining why they changed. Explaining emotions they barely understand themselves. And that feels overwhelming. So instead of coming back, they stay distant. And over time, distance becomes identity. They start to see themselves as someone who doesn't need people. Someone who prefers being alone. Someone who is better off without attachments. And maybe part of that is true. But another part is protection disguised as preference, because it's easier to believe you don't need people than to admit that needing people has hurt you. So they rewrite the story in their mind. I like being alone. I don't need anyone. People are too much. And the more they repeat it, the more it feels real. Even if There's a quiet part of them that still misses connection, not loud enough to change their behavior, but present enough to feel something like absence. And that's where it gets complicated, because from the outside, it looks like they've chosen isolation, but from the inside, it feels like survival, like this is the only way to stay stable, to stay safe, to stay in control. Because when you've been overwhelmed by people before, whether through disappointment, misunderstanding, or emotional exhaustion, distance doesn't feel like loss. It feels like protection, and that protection becomes a habit, a quiet, consistent habit of choosing less conversation, less vulnerability, less exposure, until one day there's almost nothing left. And yet, they don't always feel free, because even though they've cut people off, they haven't cut off the part of themselves that still wants connection. That part stays, silent, but alive. And that's the tension they live with, wanting connection, but not trusting it, missing people, but not reaching out, caring, but staying distant. And if you've ever felt this, you know how confusing it can be. Because it's not that you don't love people, it's that being close to people feels heavier than being alone, even if alone feels empty sometimes. So you choose the weight you can carry. And for now, that weight is distance. But this behavior, this quiet disappearing, isn't random. It comes from somewhere deeper, something that builds slowly, over time. Something most people don't talk about. And in the next part, we'll go deeper into that hidden layer, the internal conflict that makes someone cut everyone off, even when they don't truly want to. If this content speaks the words you can't explain, click subscribe. Thank you for your support. The real struggle isn't the distance, it's what's happening underneath it, because people who cut everyone off aren't empty. They're overwhelmed, not always in obvious ways. Sometimes it doesn't look like chaos, it looks like quiet. But inside that quiet, there's a constant negotiation happening, a push and pull. Part of them wants connection, real connection, the kind where they don't have to filter themselves or explain every feeling. But another part doesn't trust it, not fully, because trust has been complicated. Maybe it was broken, slowly, over time, not through one big moment, but through small disappointments that added up, moments where they felt unheard, moments where they opened up, and the response didn't match the vulnerability, moments where they realized people don't always see you the way you see them, and those moments leave something behind, not loud, but lasting, a kind of emotional memory. So now, every time connection starts to grow, there's hesitation. Not because they don't want it, but because they've learned that wanting it comes with risk. And risk feels dangerous, so they begin to protect themselves. Before anything even goes wrong, they withdraw early. They don't go too deep. They keep parts of themselves hidden. And if something feels slightly off, they pull away completely. Not as a reaction, but as prevention. Because in their mind, it's better to leave first than to be left. Better to disconnect than to feel disappointed again. But this protection comes with a cost, because the more they avoid vulnerability, the less real connection they experience. And without real connection, relationships start to feel shallow, surface level, predictable, and that only reinforces their belief. People don't really understand me, so they go deeper into isolation, not realizing that the very thing they're protecting themselves from is also the thing they're slowly losing. There's also another layer, one that's harder to see: guilt. Because even though they pull away, they know people care about them. They know there are messages left unread, calls they didn't return, connections they let fade, and that awareness sits quietly in the background, not loud enough to change behavior, but present enough to create discomfort. So now, it's not just distance, it's distance mixed with guilt. And guilt makes it even harder to come back, because the longer they stay away, the more they feel like they've done something wrong. And the harder it becomes to explain, so they stay away longer. And the cycle continues. There's also the fear of being too much. Not in the loud sense, but in the emotional sense. They worry that if they open up fully, if they show the depth of what they feel, it might overwhelm people or push them away. So instead of risking that, they minimize themselves. They keep things light, safe, controlled. But over time, that controlled version of themselves starts to feel disconnected from who they really are. And that creates another kind of discomfort. Because now, even when they are around people, they don't feel fully present. They feel partially there, like they're watching themselves interact, instead of actually experiencing it. And that feeling of not being fully seen, even when you're physically present, can be more isolating than being alone. So they choose solitude. Because at least in solitude, they don't have to pretend, they don't have to manage impressions, they don't have to filter emotions, they can just be. Even if that being comes with silence, and over time, that silence becomes familiar, comfortable in a strange way, because it's predictable, no surprises, no misunderstandings, no emotional risk, but also no deep connection. And that's the quiet trade-off. Safety in exchange for connection, control in exchange for vulnerability, peace in exchange for closeness. And the hardest part is, this trade-off doesn't feel like a choice anymore. It feels like the only option. Because once someone gets used to protecting themselves this way, opening back up feels unnatural, even dangerous, like stepping into something unstable. And so they stay where it feels safer, even if it's lonelier. But here's what makes it even more complex. They don't always realize this is what they're doing. From their perspective, they're just tired. Tired of conversations, tired of expectations, tired of emotional effort. And that's true. But underneath that tiredness, there's a pattern built from past experiences, emotional memory, and quiet self-protection. And until that pattern is understood, it continues, quietly, consistently, until distance becomes normal, and connection becomes something they observe, instead of experience. But patterns, even deeply rooted ones, can be seen. And when something is seen clearly, it starts to lose its control. So in the next part, we'll gently explore a different way forward, not by forcing connection, but by understanding how to return to it without losing yourself in the process. The way back doesn't start with people. It starts with awareness, not the kind that judges, but the kind that notices. Because before anything changes, you have to see what's been happening without immediately trying to fix it. So instead of asking, "Why am I like this?" try something softer. What have I been protecting myself from? That question alone can shift something, because it moves you from blame to understanding. And understanding creates space. Space to breathe, space to feel, space to choose differently. You don't have to suddenly reconnect with everyone. You don't have to explain everything all at once. That would feel overwhelming, and it's not necessary. Start smaller than that. Much smaller. Maybe it's just replying to one message without overthinking the perfect response. Maybe it's allowing a short conversation without feeling like you need to be fully on. Maybe it's simply letting yourself feel something for someone again without immediately pulling away. These are small things, but small things change patterns, because the goal isn't to become a different person overnight. The goal is to gently remind yourself that connection doesn't have to feel the way it used to, that it can be lighter, simpler, less demanding. You're allowed to set new boundaries, not walls, but boundaries. There's a difference. Walls keep everything out. Boundaries let things in, but on your terms. And learning that difference is part of the process. You don't have to give people full access to you. You just have to stop denying yourself access to connection entirely. Because isolation might feel safe, but it also keeps you from experiencing the kind of moments that make life feel real, not perfect, not easy, but real. And maybe that's what you've been missing. Not people, but realness. The kind that doesn't require performance. The kind that allows silence without discomfort. The kind that doesn't make you feel like you have to explain every part of yourself. That kind of connection exists, but it doesn't appear all at once. It builds slowly, through small, consistent openness, through moments where you choose to stay instead of withdraw, moments where you allow something to continue instead of ending it early. And yes, there will still be risk. There's no way around that. But the difference now is that you're not approaching connection the same way. You're not trying to prove anything. You're not trying to be understood perfectly. You're just showing up a little more honestly. And honesty, even in small amounts, creates something different, something more stable. Because real connection isn't built on perfection. It's built on presence. And presence doesn't require you to have everything figured out. It just requires you to be there, as you are, not filtered, not performed, just present. And maybe that feels unfamiliar at first, maybe even uncomfortable. That's okay. Unfamiliar doesn't mean wrong. It just means new, and new takes time. So be patient with yourself. Not in a passive way, but in a gentle, active way, where you notice your patterns and slowly choose something different, one moment at a time. Because you're not broken. You adapted. You found a way to protect yourself when something felt too heavy to carry. And that deserves understanding, not judgment. But now, you're allowed to evolve that protection, to make it more flexible, more open, more aligned with who you are becoming, not just who you had to be. And that process is quiet. It won't look dramatic. It won't feel like a sudden transformation. It will feel like small shifts, almost unnoticeable at first. But over time, those shifts create something new, a different relationship with people, a different relationship with yourself. And eventually, connection won't feel like something you have to avoid. It will feel like something you can approach carefully, but willingly. And maybe that's enough for now. Not complete change, just willingness. So if something in this story felt familiar, don't rush past it. Sit with it. Let it stay for a moment. Because there's more to understand, more to explore, more parts of yourself waiting quietly. And if you're ready, there's another story waiting for you. One that goes deeper into how we build connection without losing who we are.